Alrighty, welcome to week 7. Oh my goodness, week 7 already of English 210 online through USD. Sorry about the formality of all that. I'm just still trying to get used to this new software, recording software that I started using last week. Before I get to the PowerPoint this week, I thought about skipping PowerPoint and skipping the lecture this week. But I do think it's important to remind us of some things, and so I'll be getting to the PowerPoint in just a second. But I do want to remind everybody of the schedule for this week, which you can find on D2L. I'll highlight it here. That week 7, just like week 4, the discussion forums look a little different. You're assigned to a very particular group, and you have a rather strict deadlines set throughout the week. The first one is on Wednesday, by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, you are supposed to copy and paste whatever draft you may have done of your second paper to your group's discussion board. And include with that, some people forgot to do this last time, include with that 3 questions that you'd like your group mates to respond to. So be sure to look at the deadlines there. If you have questions about anything, please let me know as soon as possible. Also, I want to remind everybody that there is a writing center at the University of South Dakota that's in operation during the summer. I actually spoke with the director last week, and she would like the writing center to be a bit busier than it is. So please ensure that you click on that link and get to this PDF that gives you all the information you need for accessing that service. I think only a handful of you have taken advantage of it, and I think it would be really important for all, maybe not all of you, but certainly anyone who thinks they may need a little bit of extra help. Please take advantage of the Writing Center, okay? And do try to stay on task this week. A few groups during week 4 got sort of out of sync with each other, posted feedback too late for group members to actually incorporate it into their second papers. Some people posting feedback on Sunday, the actual day that papers were due, which is kind of counterintuitive. So keep in mind that Wednesday, Friday, Sunday are the due dates that you should keep in mind this week in terms of paper 2. And on Sunday, make sure to go to the Dropbox and upload your second paper to the appropriate one. Okay? All right, so let's get to, wrong way. That's okay. Let's get to the PowerPoint, shall we? Writing about literature again. English 210 Introduction to Literature, Summer 2017, Week 7. This week, I have a little typo there already. I'll fix that before I post the PDFs. By the end of week 7, not the end of week 6, you should go back and review the week 4 reading material and the writing instruction, including the videos as well as the PDFs and other materials. You should review the handouts and assignment sheets relevant to paper 2, found on D2L. You should participate in your assigned discussion group, posting a partial draft and responding to the partial drafts of group members. You should reflect on your writing process, as well as on the conventions of essay writing. For example, review for yourself, thesis statements, paragraphing, audience awareness, etc. I think the self-assessment quizzes, which you also have to take this week, really target and focus on thesis statements at length. So be sure to do those assessments and quizzes early in the week just to take advantage of, see my cursor there, sorry about that, just to take advantage of that. You should continue to learn to elaborate an analysis of a literary element, noticing details, making claims, presenting evidence and commentary. Many of you are good writers. Some of you need a little bit more work in terms of grammar and mechanics and style. But beyond those issues of correctness or quality in terms of writing and sentences and writing and sentences, I think many of you still have a long way to go in terms of thinking about the structure of an essay, which is I think most of us at this point in our careers, certainly me as the teacher, but you as well as a college student, should be sort of like trying to get beyond and learning how to develop a piece of writing that's a bit more robust and a bit more formal and mature than some of the writing that was coming in during week 4. Now, of course, as I said at that time, I read all this with a grain of salt. You're writing these in a rushed and concentrated summer semester, so I do understand that many of you might not be developing your best work simply because of time constraints. But do keep in mind that I am expecting quality work, not just at the level of sentence and style and grammar, but at the level of argument and rhetoric, which involves things like providing evidence, developing commentary, having topic sentences, which I've gone over in the past and which I'll sort of direct you back to later in this lecture. And of course, at the end of the week, you'll be submitting an original essay that answers one of the prompts listed on the Paper 2 assignment sheet, which brings us to those prompts. Remember that in Paper 2, you should compose an 800 to 1200 word essay. I really want to underscore that word count. I take it very seriously. Some folks turned in essays that fell well under that 800 word minimum last time and were heavily penalized for it. So keep in mind that I do have word count expectations for these papers. So compose an essay that responds to one of the following prompts. Prompt 1, choose any poem from the chapters we have studied and examine how its sensory details, visually vivid imagery, for instance, contributes to the tone or theme of the poem. Or choose any poem from the chapters we have studied and examine how its figurative language, for example, metaphors, uses of personification, etc., contribute to the tone or theme of the poem. You may, of course, offer commentary on sensory details and figurative language. I just had a email correspondence yesterday with one of your classmates who was asking if they could focus on both of these details and how both of these details contribute to the theme. And my answer was an enthusiastic, of course, right? If that's your idea, you want to write about both of these elements of a poem, go for it, run with it. But you can also write about other elements, like if you're drawn to details of the particular speaker who's actually, this may seem redundant, speaking the poem, or if you have observations about the internal or external structure of a poem, if you have observations about the syntax, how the sentences themselves are composed, if you want to write about the rhythm or sound patterns in the poem, by all means do it, but at least one of the major components you analyze needs to be either descriptive imagery or figurative language. It can certainly be both. Though it might seem difficult, with some planning and forethought, you should be able to write an 800-word essay of any poem studied thus far, including the shortest ones. So if we go back, note that you're supposed to connect one of these elements to the tone or theme of the poem and explain why they're significant. So I want to just remind us about what tone is. I have some page numbers there from your textbook. Tone refers to the qualities of the language a speaker uses in social situations or in a poem, and it also refers to a speaker's intended effect. Of course, we're more interested in poetry here than social situations. Tone is closely related to style and diction. Remember that diction is one word that simply means word choice, right? So the various words that are chosen by the author. Tone is an effect of the speaker's expressions, as if showing a real person's feelings, manner, and attitude or relationship to a listener and to the particular subject or situation. Whereas theme, first a negative definition followed by a more positive one, theme is not simply a work subject or topic like love or freedom or nature. This was a problem I ran into in the first paper with some folks who wanted to write about how this or that short story, the theme of that story was freedom. And I wrote in my comments, I didn't necessarily penalize people heavily for this, but I did write in my comments like, look, freedom itself is not the theme of this story, right? But rather, this story is saying something to us about freedom, right? And so if we can articulate what that something is, that would be the theme, right? Freedom is a kind of like topic or subject. It isn't necessarily, or freedom is a topic or subject. It's not necessarily the theme. So a theme is not simply these things, it is rather a statement about a subject or topic. Although we can all usually agree on what a poem is about without much difficulty, right? I think many of us would agree that A Wall of Fire Rising is in some sense about freedom, right? No doubt, or about hope, but it's a little harder to determine how to state a poem's or a story's or a play's theme. So going to tone, here's a little exercise. You can pause the video and sort of think about this, take notes on your own if you'd like, but I've highlighted some important words from the definition here, and also sort of have a extract from Rita Dove's excellent poem, Daystar, which you can find on the pages listed there. So here's the first stanza. She wanted a little room for thinking, but she saw diapers steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door. So she lugged a chair behind the garage to sit out the children's naps. That's it. That's all I want to look at the moment. To analyze or give commentary on the tone of Dove's poem requires that we pay very close attention to the words and the images she arranges for us. We learn a little bit about the scenario or the situation the poem presents us, but we also learn something through the tone of the speaker's language about how this woman feels in this situation. How does the mother feel while she's taking this break, while she's waiting for her children to wake up? Is this a happy moment of motherly adoration? If not, right, if your gut's telling you no, you're right, right? But if your gut's telling you no, how do you know? Using only the evidence here, with some sort of suggestions that I've given by color coding certain words in the poem itself, how do you know that this is not a happy moment? How do you know that this is not a poem, or at the moment not setting up to be a poem about, say, the joys of motherhood? So thinking about theme, hopefully you paused the video and spent some time thinking about that question. I've highlighted the important bit of the definition of theme up there, a statement about that topic. Here's another section of Rita Dove's poem, Daystar. Okay, so this is much later in the poem. She had an hour, at best, before Liza appeared, pouting from the top of the stairs. And just what was Mother doing out back with the field mice? Why, building a palace. The poem is clearly about motherhood. I think we could all mostly agree on that, right? So that's the subject or topic that this poem is taking up, right? That's the idea, right, or the occasion that inspires Rita Dove to write this poem, whether or not this is something she herself experienced. But this determination that the poem is about motherhood alone does not articulate the poem's theme or themes. In order to do that, in order to articulate a theme, we need to get a sense not just of, sorry about the typo, I'll fix that too, not just of the speaker's tone, but of the general idea or statement Dove's lines imply about motherhood, right? So the word statement here is a little funny because the poem never states its theme, right? It's implied, right? We're the ones as the readers who have to generate the statement, right? So think about these questions. Why is the child surprised to find her mother out among the field mice? And whether or not the mother is sort of anticipating her child Liza waking up and asking herself this, or whether it's actually happening, sort of doesn't matter, right? Why is the child surprised, or why does the mother imagine that the child will be surprised to find her mother out among the field mice? And how do we surmise? I'll fix that too. Surmise Liza's surprise. Note that the speaker never tells us that Liza is surprised to find her mother outside, or that Liza will be surprised when she finds her mother outside. So how do we know she'll be surprised? That may be a tone question rather than a theme question, right? Of what is the mother's palace a metaphor, right? So the mother here is responding to this surprise by saying, why? Building a palace. What am I doing out here among the field mice? I'm building a palace. What is this palace a metaphor for? What is it a metaphor of, right? What does Dove suggest to us about motherhood in general by juxtaposing the child's pouting beside this invisible palace? Now, these may be difficult questions to answer, So if you can't immediately answer these questions, give yourself time to think. I don't know if I've mentioned this in previous lectures before, but I often tell my face-to-face classes that they need to find a thinking spot. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the cartoon or the A.A. Milne books, Winnie the Pooh, right? But Winnie the Pooh, it's ironic in Winnie the Pooh because Pooh doesn't have any brains, he just has stuffing in his head, right? But Pooh had what he called a thinking spot. He would go find it, believe it's just a log in the middle of the woods, right? He would go sit on the log and tap his stuffed forehead and tell himself, think, think, think. So you don't necessarily have to do that, right? But you have to give yourself space and time to let your brain do its thing. Our brains are amazing organs, right, that do all kinds of work that we are not conscious of, right? And they do this work every day. And if you put a poem in front of our eyes, right, eyes that are sort of controlled by our brain, if we do that and read a poem and think about it and try to digest it, right, let it really cook inside of us, our brain is going to do some amazing things with it, right? Also, as I've been saying since day one of our poetry unit, the inner, hidden, deeper secret meaning of poems, especially lyric poems, right, tend not to be apparent to us at first, or tends not to be apparent to us at first. Okay. Before I move on here, I just want to give the attendance question, right? Thinking ahead to our drama unit, which will begin next week and sort of carry us to the end of the summer semester, which I know is maybe a happy thing, but also a bit sad, since summer will then almost be over for some of us. Have you ever attended a play live? You can certainly just write one-word answer if you'd like, but if you have attended a live play, I'd be curious what the play was, okay? And maybe some of you have even performed in live plays, so I'd be just curious to know what your play-going experience might be, okay? All right, back to the matters at hand. So often the sort of like fruit of your intellectual labor will sort of come out in the commentary that you provide in your body paragraphs. For the most part, the bulk of your writing should take the form of various claims, usually found in thesis statements, topic sentences, or concluding sentences, or in the commentary that explains how your textual evidence supports your claims, right? So the bulk of your writing, meaning the words you provide, should probably take the form of claims or commentary. Certainly there will be the words of the author in your papers as well, but those will occupy the place of quotations, probably. Your paragraphs do not need a wicked amount of commentary. I lived on the East Coast for 10 years, so I apologize for that. You do not need a wicked amount of commentary, the amount I might expect from an English major or a graduate student or another academic scholar, but your paragraph should have at least 2 healthy sentences, probably 3 or 4, that explain in detail how the evidence you present, usually in the form of quotations, supports the claim you make in your topic sentences. Some of the revisions I received of paper 1, I didn't get many, but some of them were excellent, right? I could actually tell by merging the documents through Word that the person had gone in and actually changed and inserted a topic sentence and had really taken to heart the writing instruction I provided on week 4, that the textbook has provided you all semester, all summer session, and also all the study aids and videos that are available on D2L, really took those lessons to heart and applied it when revising substantially the essay and got a much better grade for it, right? But if the initial essay you submit does these things, you may not need to go back and revise your papers. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. If, for instance, sort of thinking about all these things, if, for instance, I think Rita Dove's visual imagery in her first stanza, which I talked about just a couple slides ago, if the visual imagery underscores the dreariness and the occasional mental drain of parenting, a good deal of which traditionally falls to the mother, not so much anymore perhaps for some families, but traditionally, historically has fallen to the mother, then I might ask myself why I think this way, right, and what my evidence will be. Once I decide what my evidence will be, right, the vivid diction surrounding the diapers and the doll perhaps, I should then task myself with writing up at least 2 or 3 sentences that elaborate my reasons for using this evidence to support my claim. And remember, my claim concerns the visual imagery of the first stanza and the occasional mental drain of parenting. This is, of course, I'm not arguing that parenting is horrible or bad, certainly not saying that, right? But any of us who are parents or any of us who have been caretakers know that being a caretaker, being part of the process of developing and forming and caring for human beings can be incredibly labor intensive and mentally draining. Okay. In terms of elaboration, how do you develop or compose commentary? How do you elaborate or expand it without appearing repetitive? I find that many folks recoil from the idea of elaborating their thoughts or analysis, that they've developed a rather nasty allergy to analysis, usually dubbed over-analysis, right? A pesky term that serves as an alibi for thinking too much or overthinking, right? I can't tell you how many times, right, family members or friends have heard me sort of talk about what I do for a living and sort of pause and sort of look at me with some suspicion and think, potentially thinking, but also saying it's in some time at some points, aren't you worried that you're overthinking things by paying so much attention to things like word choice and all this kind of stuff? And honestly, I don't think they know how insulting that is, right? They don't know how insulting it is, and I don't think they understand how urgent it is to teach human beings and people to do what sometimes people outside of college or people who've been done with college for decades often somewhat derogatorily call overthinking, right? One of the purposes of a liberal arts education, or really any general education, is the refinement of one's critical thinking skills. You've probably heard that phrase, critical thinking, before. And the skill set that usually goes by the name critical thinking includes the ability to notice the significance of certain patterns or choices, and the ability to tease out and develop what those patterns or choices imply, right? And so whether one is a car mechanic, right, or a meteorologist, or a scientist, or a nurse, or a doctor, or a literary scholar like me, in many ways, the sort of commonality between people who do those jobs well is that they are able to notice things. They're able to articulate problems, not just find solutions to ready-made problems, but to articulate problems that will open up the possibility of new solutions, or, in my case, interesting solutions that really just sort of challenge us to think differently. Those patterns or choices in the context of this class, or in the context of texts or other media, might involve a particularly disturbing advertisement on television, or a political speech, or a platform, or, as in this class, a poem. Whatever the text might be that you're most drawn to in your life, learning how to read poetry is not irrelevant to the larger skill set of critical thinking that will be a boon to you and to your success. Anyway, getting off my soapbox, how do you elaborate or expand an analysis without appearing repetitive? First thing to do is look at an example. I know I sound like a broken record here, but it's very clear to me that many folks are not spending much time in the textbook, and certainly not spending much time on D2L, right? So really, I can only do so much for some folks who aren't willing to sort of put in the time or the labor, right? So if you're willing to sort of put some more time in, look at an example of an analysis of a poem. I have some page numbers there for you to look at, and go through that example paragraph by paragraph and ask yourself how the author there fleshes out her points, right? Now, there's not a name on the paper, but in the sort of paragraph before the paper, Kelly Mays does suggest that the gender of the author, so I'm using the pronoun her. Go paragraph by paragraph and make notes to yourself about what the author's primary claims are, what evidence she gives to support those claims, and then how she goes about explaining that evidence, right? Do what is called in other composition classrooms a rhetorical analysis of that analysis, right? How does it hang together? how does it work? Number 2, practice noticing things in whatever texts or media interest you. If you find you have intuitions about why certain details seem significant, pause and try to test your intuitions against evidence available to you. When I was quite a bit younger, I was super into professional wrestling. I hope that doesn't that probably says a lot about me. But when I was much younger, looking back, I actually think that the particular way in which I was a fan, right, participating in message boards, getting arguments with people about pro wrestling, the quality of this or that match, or how wacky this or that storyline might have been, or in what ways it's more of an soap opera than a sport, and all this kind of stuff, right? But a lot of that did actually prepare me for learning to notice things in other media, right, including poems, including short stories, noticing details. But now, instead of focusing on like camera work or selling or right, how invested a crowd may appear to be in a particular, good guy versus bad guy saga, I'm now drawn to things that may, potentially bore other people, like the syntax of a Shakespeare poem, right? Those two things, while in terms of content are worlds apart, nevertheless, the critical thinking involved in analyzing them is intimately related, right? So anyway, even in your downtime, say you're into a show like Fargo, or you're into a show like Big Little Lies or something like that, pay attention. Ask yourself if you can notice patterns in how those objects are made, right? And see if you can't exercise some of the skills that I'm trying to sort of incorporate in this classroom outside of it. Get in the habit also of testing texts or media against your expectations. Crime dramas, which I talked about weeks ago, almost never conflict with our expectations, right? And why? Because the plot is never different, right? The action of each episode changes, but the plot is the same, right? Many of you got that question wrong on the midterm, by the way, so that's why I'm bringing it up. So crime dramas almost never conflict with our expectations, though more artful dramas do tend to push back or surprise us in ways we had not expected. When we find our expectations met or frustrated, whether it's in a play or a short story or a television show or a movie or a poem or a pro wrestling match or a news program, what might be some implications to tease out, right? Implications that relate to the ideas or themes present in the text or media. Get in the habit then of thinking, and get in the habit of writing. Right? So just to underscore or remind us of some places where you can find some writing instruction, certainly you can go back to my lecture from week 4, which is still available, I think, up on D2L, and the PowerPoint I have there. There's certainly all the handouts and all the videos available through the content pages of D2L. I mean, some of the problem might be that there's so much helpful writing instruction out there that it's hard to really digest it all. But focusing just on what's in the Norton introduction, I have some page numbers here that I want to remind you of. Right? Page numbers that it's clear to me many folks did not look at. I know this lecture might seem a little accusatory, but this certainly does not apply to everybody or even a majority of people. But this is those sorts of comments are really directed at people probably who aren't even watching this lecture. But folks who I think really need to start putting a little more work into the class if they want to pass it with a grade that they like, right? And so if that's a goal of yours, if you're watching this lecture, whether or not those comments apply to you, if you're interested in doing a bit better this go around on this second paper, just look at all the stuff that's in the textbook, ready and waiting for you to sort of think about and digest and absorb, right? And this doesn't even involve the sample essays that the book includes. I certainly want to emphasize the checklists. I've highlighted them in red, right? If you want to get a sense of all the thinking and labor that sort of goes into producing a good first draft, take a look at these checklists and really ask yourself, are you sort of thinking about all of these things as you compose a paper, as you edit it, as you revise it, polishing it up, getting it ready to submit, are you thinking about these things? If not, chances are you probably should, right? Or at least start getting into the habit of checking most of these things, if not all of them. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I've reached the end of the slideshow and the end of my lecture. I hope there was some stuff useful for most of you there. Keep in mind and remember that the Writing Center is there for folks who need help, should you need help. And please, please, please stay on task in terms of the discussion boards. Let me just show you real quick underneath Discuss. Hide those topics. You'll see here, I'm going to blow this up a little bit, I've already assigned the groups for you. So if there are any questions or concerns about those things, you can see the groups are already there. There's 5 groups again. Just shoot me an email if you have a question or concern. The good news is you have no reading assignment this week other than the assignment of reading your peers' papers. So hopefully that frees up a little bit of your time, especially now that the midterm exam's out of the way, to focus on the second paper. Okay. Well, I look forward to reading those, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have questions or concerns. Otherwise, have a good week.